Dr. Rhonda Patrick here. Today, we're going to go deep on coffee. We've spent the last month or so reading through all of the latest research on coffee. And in this episode, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about how to get the maximum health and longevity benefits while minimizing the negative side effects. The good news is that coffee can slow down your epigenetic aging clock, drop cardiovascular risk, and sharpen cognition. But how you source your coffee, how you brew it, and how you time it makes a big difference. And if done the wrong way, coffee can raise LDL, disrupt sleep, and you'll miss out on some of the benefits I just mentioned. So in this episode, we'll answer questions like how coffee actually slows down aging and how to maximize those benefits, which beans and roast levels are healthiest, why a paper filter matters for cholesterol and cancer risk, the best way to source and store your beans to avoid mold in your coffee, the exact caffeine dose for endurance, strength, and mental focus, which supplement you can take to reduce some of the side effects of coffee, such as the jitters, whether cream can blunt some of the positive benefits of coffee, and much more. By the end of this episode, you'll know how to turn coffee into a precise, science-backed protocol for longer life, better metabolism, and peak brain performance. So let's get started. Science increasingly demonstrates that coffee actively slows biological aging. It protects cells from damage and helps the body adapt to stress, effectively slowing down aging at the cellular level. Biological aging is not just counting the chronological age. It's the actual rate at which your cells and tissues deteriorate, your DNA accumulates damage, and your body becomes more vulnerable to disease. One powerful way scientists measure this biological aging is through something called epigenetic age, how genes turn on and off as we age, reflecting the functional state of cells or tissues relative to chronological age. The faster your epigenetic clock runs, the quicker you age and the sooner diseases of aging appear. But here's the fascinating part. Drinking coffee appears to actively slow this biological aging process. In fact, multiple large-scale studies show that regular coffee drinkers have significantly younger epigenetic age signatures compared to non-drinkers, meaning their DNA isn't just healthier, it literally behaves as if it's younger. For example, a recent analysis of nearly 16,000 people identified consistent changes in DNA methylation. These are the chemical marks controlling gene activity at 11 distinct sites closely tied to inflammation, metabolism, and the aging process itself. In another comprehensive U.S. health survey, researchers found that each additional cup of coffee corresponded to about 0.12 years younger biological age. Even more strikingly, people who consumed 3 or more cups per day had a 34 to 41% lower chance of accelerated biological aging compared to non-drinkers. In a separate multi-ethnic study using advanced epigenetic clocks, further supported this. So regular coffee intake correlated with roughly 0.7 to a full year reduction in epigenetic age for each daily cup consumed. This effect appeared consistently across multiple robust measures of biological aging. Now, it's important to mention, these are observational studies, which means they can't prove direct causation yet. But the consistency across numerous rigorous analyses strongly suggests that coffee's bioactive components, things like the chlorogenic acids, caffeine, and antioxidants formed during roasting, are actively reshaping our epigenome. In other words, coffee may be literally rewiring our genetic expression to slow down aging at the cellular level, potentially extending health span, and consistent, robust scientific evidence does show regular coffee drinkers do actually live longer. And not only that, they also experience lower rates of the deadliest chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and even certain cancers. We now know coffee impacts nearly every major biological mechanism underlying aging and chronic disease. First of all, coffee drinkers consistently have up to a 27% lower risk of dying from any cause than non-coffee drinkers. This translates to almost 2 extra years of life. And even decaf coffee delivers a similar benefit. So this really suggests that compounds beyond caffeine, like polyphenols and the chlorogenic acids, do act as powerful anti-aging agents. For decades, coffee was actually thought to be bad for the heart. Turns out that was wrong. Coffee significantly reduces cardiovascular disease risk by about 10 to 15%. Coffee consumption protects against heart attacks, stroke, and cardiovascular-related death. And here's where it gets even crazier. Contrary to expectation, since coffee is generally contraindicated for arrhythmias, caffeine uniquely appears to reduce the risk of developing arrhythmias. And this was in a dose-dependent manner, with 2 to 3 cups of daily coffee linked to 12% lower arrhythmia risk and 4 to 5 cups associated with a 17% lower risk. Decaf doesn't offer this arrhythmia protection, which really highlights caffeine's unique role in somehow stabilizing heart rhythms. Most people reach for the cup of coffee in the morning. When you drink your coffee actually matters. Recent large-scale studies tell us something pretty fascinating. People who consume their coffee exclusively in the morning show significant longevity benefits compared to those who spread caffeine throughout the day. Specifically, morning coffee drinkers experience a 12% lower risk of death from all causes and an impressive 31% lower risk of cardiovascular-related death compared to non-coffee drinkers. Spreading your coffee throughout the day, so in the morning, afternoon, and evening, didn't show the same health benefits. The protective effect seems unique to starting your day with coffee rather than drinking it continuously throughout the day. So why the morning? It really comes down largely to circadian biology, the internal clock governing our sleep-wake cycles, hormone release, metabolism. So caffeine consumed late in the day powerfully disrupts this clock. There's controlled laboratory studies that show that caffeine taken within about 3 hours of natural bedtime shifts the internal clock later by roughly 45 minutes to an hour. So this is like giving yourself a mini dose of jet lag every day. The result, delayed melatonin release, disrupted sleep patterns, reduced deep sleep quality, and ultimately compromised health. But caffeine consumed early in the day actually works with your natural circadian rhythm. It supports alertness, it reinforces stable cortisol timing, and it may help anchor your internal clock, optimizing your metabolism and cardiovascular health. So there seems to be a clear takeaway protocol for coffee timing. Consuming caffeine early, so aiming to stop caffeine at least 8 to 10 hours before your natural bedtime. For most people, that means cutting off caffeine around noon or the early afternoon. You also want to keep it moderate, so 2 to 3 cups of coffee in the morning is ideal. This range provides maximum protective benefits without negative circadian disruption. You can also drink decaf coffee afternoon. So if you love the taste of coffee, there's a little bit of a placebo effect as well. You get these benefits from the polyphenols if you drink the coffee later in the day. So you can actually choose decaf to avoid interfering with your sleep quality. So in short, early caffeine intake seems to really align well with biological rhythms. It enhances cognitive performance during the day, protects against cardiovascular disease, and it maximizes coffee's powerful longevity benefits. But you don't want to continuously keep drinking it all throughout the day. Coffee also has powerful effects on metabolism, particularly the body's ability to regulate glucose and fat utilization. Regular coffee drinking, especially around 2 to 3 cups per day, consistently reduces the risk of developing metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. In fact, studies show that drinking 2 to 3 cups of coffee daily can cut diabetes risk by as much as 60%. But why does coffee have such a profound metabolic benefit? One reason appears to be its ability to activate AMP kinase, or AMPK for short. This is a central metabolic regulator inside of our cells. It's activated when we're in a fasted state, in a caloric deficit, after intense exercise, or metabolic stress. Compounds in coffee like caffeine and the chlorogenic acids can actually flip that AMPK switch on. And that controls how our cells process energy, how it manages glucose levels, and how our cells handle fats. When AMP kinase turns on, it tells the cell to burn fat, take up glucose, shut down growth pathways like mTOR. So by boosting AMP kinase activity, coffee actually helps the body become more efficient at using energy and maintaining healthier blood sugar levels. Chronic mild AMPK activation is a leading explanation, but it's not the only one. Improved gut microbiome composition, reduced inflammation, enhanced fat oxidation also play roles as well. There's a bit of a twist here because coffee can acutely raise fasting blood glucose in some individuals and may slightly decrease insulin sensitivity in the short term, largely via acute sympathetic activation, but the overall long-term effect is protective. It improves glucose tolerance, reduces triglyceride levels, and lowers long-term diabetes risk. So coffee seems to make our metabolic machinery healthier, more responsive, and better able to protect itself against age-related metabolic disease. Believe it or not, coffee used to be labeled a potential carcinogen from the 1990s to about 2016. That was wrong. The label rested on weak, confounded evidence, but acrylamide was really at the heart of it. Acrylamide is a chemical formed naturally when coffee beans are roasted, as well as during the cooking of starchy foods at high temperatures. Although acrylamide has caused cancer in lab animals at very high doses, the levels typically found in coffee pose minimal risk to humans. One standard brewed cup delivers roughly 2 to 5 micrograms of acrylamide. You'd need to drink 25 to 50 cups a day to hit the conservative reference level, which is around 2 micrograms per kilogram body weight per day. What we now know is that coffee does not increase your cancer risk. In fact, it probably reduces it, particularly for certain major cancers, including liver cancer, endometrial cancer, and skin cancer. The evidence here is compelling. Each daily cup of coffee you drink is associated with roughly a 15 to 20% reduction in liver cancer risk and about a 10% lower risk of endometrial cancer, with maximum benefits seen around 4 to 5 cups per day. Even the International Agency for Research on Cancer recently acknowledged coffee's protective role, officially removing coffee from their list of possible carcinogens. Cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States, and it is the leading cause of death in Canada, Japan, and many Western European Union states. So it is important to pay attention to. Why does coffee have these powerful anti-cancer effects? Well, coffee doesn't just have antioxidant properties. It actively reduces DNA damage. This is one of the fundamental triggers of cancer. A compelling randomized controlled trial demonstrated that people drinking dark roast coffee daily had a 23% reduction in their DNA double-stranded breaks compared to water alone. Now, DNA double-stranded breaks are among the most severe forms of genetic damage. To give you context, this is the type of damage you typically see from ionizing radiation, the kind that directly threatens your genetic code and your chromosomes, the structures that house your DNA. And this is not just the DNA integrity at stake. Chromosomal damage directly accelerates the shortening of telomeres. These are the tiny caps that protect our chromosomes from damage, our DNA that's packaged in our chromosomes. And telomeres naturally shorten with age, but damage accelerates this process dramatically. And once the telomeres become critically short, our cells then enter a state known as senescence. This is kind of a cellular aging that not only drives the aging process itself, but also greatly increases our risk for chronic diseases, including cancer. By actively reducing DNA double-stranded breaks, coffee may not only protect against cancer directly, but also may help maintain telomere length, thereby potentially slowing cellular aging and preserving genomic stability. And in fact, studies have found that regular coffee drinkers do have longer telomeres compared to non-coffee drinkers. Mechanistically, coffee triggers our cells to activate something called NRF2. This is a master cellular switch that ramps up our body's own antioxidant defenses, including glutathione. This is enhancing our natural capacity for DNA repair. But coffee's protective effects go even broader. It also influences liver metabolism, hormone regulation, and inflammation, all critical in preventing cancers that thrive on metabolic dysfunction or hormone imbalance. Interestingly, decaffeinated coffee consistently shows similar protective effects, which strongly suggests that beneficial compounds beyond caffeine, such as polyphenols and the melanoidins, are primarily driving these anti-cancer benefits. Coffee's health effects may actually start in the gut. Each cup of coffee delivers up to 2 grams of soluble fiber, plus a pharmacy of polyphenols, chlorogenic acids, melanoidins, diterpenes, and trigonelline. In a 23,000-person Nature Microbiology dataset, coffee was the single strongest dietary factor shaping the microbiome, enriching 115 bacterial species. One Lawsonibacter species shows up almost exclusively in habitual coffee drinkers, essentially acting as a microbial coffee fingerprint. What this bacterial species actually does is ferments coffee fiber and polyphenols into bioactive compounds, such as quinic acid conjugates and short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids tighten gut barrier integrity, dampen inflammation, and improve insulin sensitivity. And the quinic acid metabolites flip on the NRF2 switch for antioxidant activity, and in animal models, even lower PCSK9, which is a regulator of LDL cholesterol clearance. This is early data, but intriguing for heart health. So randomized controlled trials actually back this up. 3 cups of filtered coffee per day for 8 weeks increased bifidobacterium and faecalibacterium abundance. These are both major short-chain fatty acid producers. And it did this without harming gut microbial diversity. So parallel rodent work shows that coffee melanoidins actually thicken the mucus layer, and it suppresses opportunistic pathogens from taking hold in the gut. And coffee dose does matter. The sweet spot appears to be 2 to 4 cups a day. That range reliably enriches short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria while keeping the pro-inflammatory strains in check. Go much higher and the data gets noisy and diversity shifts are study dependent. So I think the key takeaway here is that coffee, caffeinated or decaffeinated, acts as a prebiotic matrix. It has fibers, melanoidins, and polyphenols that feed the gut ecosystem that in turn generate metabolites linked to lower inflammation, better cholesterol handling, and neuroprotection. So the next time you're having your coffee, remember, you're not just stimulating your brain, you're actually feeding an entire microbial network in your gut that may be central to coffee's longevity signal. There is an important nuance when it comes to coffee's health benefits, such as the cancer protective effects. Brewing method does matter. Most studies show clear cancer protection involved filtered coffee. Boiled or unfiltered methods like the French press or espresso allow oily compounds called diterpenes to enter our cup of coffee. At higher consumption levels, these diterpenes have been associated with slightly elevated risks of certain cancers, such as pancreatic cancer and respiratory tract cancers. So why does brewing method have such a profound impact on health outcomes? It comes down to 2 key groups of coffee compounds. On the one hand, coffee is rich in polyphenols. These are powerful antioxidants that can lower dementia risk by as much as 50% and reduce DNA damage. This is a critical precursor to cancer by around 23%. On the other hand, coffee also contains these fat-soluble diterpenes. If not filtered out, the diterpenes can significantly raise LDL cholesterol by as much as 30 milligrams per deciliter within just a few weeks. This elevates cardiovascular risk. Regardless of one's perspective on LDL's role in cardiovascular disease, there is no reason coffee should be raising your LDL by this much. So this is best avoided if possible. To fully optimize coffee's health benefits, we need to understand how different brewing methods dramatically change its chemical makeup and ultimately its impact on our health. Coffee contains 2 critical types of compounds we're going to focus on. First, diterpenes, specifically caffeine and chiweol. These are fat-soluble molecules that naturally are found in coffee beans. The problem with these diterpenes is that they significantly raise LDL cholesterol. In fact, studies have found that people who regularly drink unfiltered coffee, like from French press, espresso, or boiled coffee, it can raise their LDL levels by roughly 10 to 30 milligrams per deciliter within just a few weeks, and that does increase cardiovascular disease risk. There's also links between higher diterpene exposure from unfiltered coffee with slightly elevated risk of certain cancers. Second, and more beneficially, coffee beans are rich in polyphenols, primarily the chlorogenic acids. Polyphenols are powerful antioxidants that reduce inflammation, oxidative stress, protect us from chronic diseases. Unlike diterpenes, polyphenols are water-soluble, so they dissolve in water and easily pass through paper filters. Here's why this chemical difference matters. Brewing methods dictate how much these compounds end up in our coffee. Unfiltered methods like espresso, French press, boiled coffee, or stovetop percolators retain the oily diterpenes. For perspective, espresso contains around 1,100 milligrams of caffeine per liter. Turkish boiled coffee contains around 900 milligrams per liter, while French press and mocha pots contain 70 to 90 milligrams per liter. Practically, that means 1 espresso shot has about 30 milligrams of caffeine, and a typical cup of coffee from other unfiltered methods have between 10 and 200 milligrams. In contrast, filtered coffees like traditional paper drip, instant cold brew, trap these diterpenes in the filter, essentially eliminating their negative effects while still preserving beneficial polyphenols. Recent studies have shown that even workplace coffee machines, which usually lack proper filtration, deliver significantly higher diterpene concentrations, between 140 to 170 milligrams per liter, compared to filtered coffee prepared at home, which often shows undetectable levels. As a side note, I do want to mention that many traditional paper drip coffee machines do run hot water through plastic. In other words, hot water going to plastic will accelerate the release of microplastics into your beverage as well as their plastic-associated chemicals. So if you are going to do a filtered coffee, pour over is probably your best bet. Doing something into a glass container and not having the hot water touch plastic. On a similar note, if you're drinking espresso, those espresso pods are also plastic. And so having hot water go through those pods is also releasing microplastics and their associated chemicals into your beverage as well. Just something to keep in mind. Now, what about the antioxidants, which significantly contribute to the health benefits of coffee? The story shifts here a little bit. Espresso actually tops the chart in antioxidant activity per volume. This is because it has a very intense extraction. Cold brew also ranks very highly because it's extended brewing duration. French press and percolators provide moderate antioxidant levels, while filtered drip and instant coffee, though slightly lower, still offer substantial antioxidant benefits. But antioxidants don't depend solely on brewing methods. They're also influenced by bean type, roast level, how the beans are grown, and brewing temperature. First, let's consider the two major coffee species, Arabica and Robusta. Arabica beans are generally preferred for flavor. They contain less caffeine, so about half as much, and there's somewhat fewer chlorogenic acids. Those are the key antioxidant than Robusta beans. Robusta beans are higher in caffeine, higher in the chlorogenic acids, and they deliver more potent antioxidant effects and stronger mental stimulation, but they also tend to taste more bitter and earthy. But origin matters too. Where and how coffee is grown also influences its biochemical makeup in important ways. So altitude does matter. Beans grown at higher altitude elevations, like those from Colombia's high altitude regions, mature slowly, leading to a sweeter, brighter flavor and less caffeine and antioxidant density compared to beans grown at lower altitudes. Sun exposure and latitude matter. So coffee beans from regions near the equator, like Ethiopia or Kenya, typically develop higher concentrations of antioxidants like the chlorogenic acids as protection against intense sunlight and environmental stress. So it's an adaptation. It's kind of a stress response that the coffee bean plant is producing more of these antioxidants. Soil type matters, so mineral-rich volcanic soils found in regions like Guatemala and Colombia influence coffee bean composition. It enhances the sweetness and complex flavors due to the elevated sucrose and lipid content. And processing techniques, washed versus natural, also matter. So how beans are processed after harvesting can affect their fermentation, amino acid levels, and how antioxidants form during the roasting process. This directly influences their final biochemical composition and also their health potential. So practically speaking, I think the best way to choose a coffee bean, if your goal is higher antioxidants, cognitive enhancement, maximum caffeine kick, you might want to lean towards Robusta beans, or as a second best bean grown closer to the equator, like a coffee from Ethiopia or Kenya. If you prefer milder stimulation, a sweeter taste, slightly lower caffeine, then a higher altitude Arabica, like those from Colombia or Ethiopia, would be ideal. Remember that roasting and brewing methods can also dramatically influence the final antioxidant content in coffee. It generally peaks around medium roast. A darker roast reduces antioxidant levels regardless of species, and brewing methods like paper-filtered coffee will remove most of the cholesterol-raising diterpenes, and they'll leave most of the polyphenols there no matter where your beans are from. Finally, brewing temperature also does play a role. Really hot brewing methods like espresso or drip brewing quickly extract antioxidants due to the higher temperatures and shorter brew times. Cold brewing, while lower in temperature, can reach comparable antioxidant levels if it's steeped long enough. So this is typically 12 to 24 hours. But hot methods generally yield higher concentrations per serving. So here's how to translate all this science into a smarter coffee shopping decision. You want to focus on three variables: species, origin, and roast. First, if you want maximal antioxidants, a Robusta dominant blend is your highest yield option. Robusta beans contain about 60% more chlorogenic acids than Arabica. If you prefer the flavor of Arabica, choose lots grown near the equator at high elevation. Think altitude, Ethiopia, Kenya, because equatorial sunlight and slow maturation will boost the polyphenol density well above lower latitude Arabicas from, say, Colombia or Peru. And finally, keep the roast in the light to medium range. That window preserves the greatest fraction of chlorogenic acids, whereas dark roasts burn off a significant portion of those antioxidants. So given everything we've discussed so far, it might not surprise you that the brewing method you choose can dramatically influence coffee's health impact. But what's truly fascinating and maybe surprising is just how distinct these outcomes can be depending on how you prepare your coffee. Filtered coffee consistently stands out as the best choice for longevity and overall health. A major cohort study found that regularly drinking filtered coffee was linked to about a 15% lower all-cause mortality compared to drinking no coffee at all. Similarly, regular consumption of filtered coffee, around 2 to 5 cups per day, is strongly associated with a 20% lower risk of cardiovascular-related mortality compared to drinking no coffee at all. Neither of these protective associations were observed with unfiltered coffee methods like French press, likely due to their cholesterol-raising diterpenes. And when it comes to cognitive health, the data is even more striking. Consistently drinking filtered coffee can lower your dementia risk by as much as 50% compared to not drinking coffee. But these benefits diminish sharply or even reverse when using unfiltered brewing methods, particularly when consuming extreme quantities of coffee. For instance, heavy consumption of boiled coffee, like Turkish coffee, we're talking extreme, around 8 cups or more per day, is linked to a nearly double risk of dementia compared to moderate drinkers, likely due to those diterpenes, which I mentioned earlier. They're raising LDL cholesterol. High intake of boiled coffee also shows potential association with increased risk for specific cancers, as mentioned earlier, pancreatic cancer, respiratory tract cancers as well. So it really highlights the need for moderation and caution when you're drinking boiled coffee. You do not want to go to that extreme level of drinking 8 cups per day. I would say, given the otherwise strong evidence for coffee's anti-dementia effects at more normal doses, either excessive intake itself or specifically boiled coffee is likely the culprit here with respect to increased dementia risk. Because as I mentioned earlier, filtered coffee is associated with as much as a 50% lower dementia risk compared to not drinking coffee. Now, espresso is somewhat of a special case. While espresso does still contain those cholesterol-raising diterpenes, moderate espresso consumption, like 2 to 3 servings daily, remains strongly associated with a lower overall mortality, likely due to its exceptionally high antioxidant density per ounce. Espresso's robust polyphenol content might actually balance out some of the diterpene-related downsides, providing that you're maintaining a moderate consumption of espresso. Instant coffee, which is often overlooked, actually holds up remarkably well against filtered coffee. Studies consistently find that instant coffee drinkers also benefit from a lower all-cause mortality, as well as a significant protection against diabetes and cognitive decline. That's probably because instant coffee also has high antioxidant levels similar to traditionally brewed coffee. So to sum it up, filtered coffee really emerges as the best way to brew coffee. It offers the strongest, most consistent health benefits across cardiovascular, metabolic, cognitive, and longevity outcomes. Espresso and instant coffee also provide substantial protective effects at moderate consumption levels. Unfiltered methods, especially boiled coffee or very heavy French press consumption, require greater caution due to their cholesterol-raising diterpenes, and at very, very extreme high levels, 8 cups or more a day, potential cognitive risks, even though moderate intake probably still offers beneficial polyphenols and antioxidants. Before we continue, I just want to mention something important. If you're finding these episodes valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the notification bell. It's the only way to ensure you'll be notified when a new episode goes live. Many people assume they'll be alerted automatically, but unless the bell is clicked, they won't be. Now back to the episode. And coffee's health benefits extend far beyond just its caffeine content. And that really challenges a major assumption that many people hold, that caffeine alone drives coffee's benefits. But the story shifts dramatically when we look at neurological outcomes like cognitive decline and neurodegenerative diseases. This is where caffeine clearly takes center stage. Regular caffeinated coffee drinkers, typically those consuming around 3 or more cups per day, show a remarkable 34 to 37% reduction in the risk of developing Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease compared to non-drinkers. Even moderate caffeine intake, about 2 cups per day or around 200 milligrams daily, noticeably slows cognitive decline, particularly in people already showing signs of mild cognitive impairment. This is a common precursor to Alzheimer's disease. Interestingly, genetically predicted higher caffeine levels in the bloodstream have also been linked to lower Alzheimer's disease risk, suggesting caffeine itself might directly influence brain aging. The neuroprotective effects of caffeine can be traced directly to its unique biological mechanism of action. Caffeine functions as a competitive antagonist at adenosine A2A and A1 receptors. The A2A subtype is especially critical here because these receptors are densely expressed along the indirect pathway of our basal ganglia. This is a key brain region that's involved in motor control and movement regulation. By blocking A2A receptors, caffeine reduces the excessive inhibitory signaling that's characteristic of Parkinson's disease, simultaneously boosting dopamine D2 receptor activity. Animal studies reinforce this mechanistic picture. So chronic blockade of the A2A receptors with caffeine consistently reduces neuroinflammation. It limits harmful aggregation of alpha-synuclein. This is a hallmark of Parkinson's disease. And it also preserves mitochondrial function in dopamine-producing neurons. The clinical relevance is pretty striking in that some Parkinson's drugs now specifically target these same A2A receptors. The precise molecular action of A2A receptors could explain why caffeine delivers unique neurological benefits that decaffeinated coffee does not replicate. So if you're wanting to preserve your cognitive function, if protecting your brain is a primary goal, caffeinated coffee clearly emerges as the superior choice. Now, beyond just protecting your brain against long-term neurodegenerative diseases, caffeine is also a powerful, rapid-acting cognitive enhancer. At moderate doses, roughly 100 to 300 milligrams per day, or about 1 to 3 cups of coffee, it reliably boosts attention, improves working memory, speeds up reaction times by about 10 to 15%, and enhances overall cognitive performance, especially when you're tired or at those less optimal times of the day, like early morning or the mid-afternoon slump. How does caffeine achieve these immediate cognitive improvements? It all comes back to adenosine. So as you stay awake, adenosine builds up, binding to specific receptors A1 and A2 in the brain, slowing down neural activity and increasing sleep pressure. Caffeine blocks these receptors, essentially removing that brake, allowing the brain circuits associated with alertness and attention, powered by neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine and acetylcholine, to become more active. And the result is greater mental clarity, quicker thinking, reduced feelings of fatigue. But caffeine is not the whole story. Coffee contains several other bioactive compounds, particularly the polyphenols like the chlorogenic acids, that independently benefit the brain, even without caffeine. Decaffeinated coffee, which preserves these polyphenols, can still improve blood flow and oxygen delivery to active brain regions during challenging tasks. This is a process called neurovascular coupling. Polyphenols also increase levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which is an essential growth factor for neuroplasticity, for learning and memory. So, for example, studies have shown that a single serving of coffee fruit extract can boost circulating BDNF levels by over 140%. In addition, these coffee polyphenols act as antioxidants and anti-inflammatory agents, activating protective cellular pathways like NRF2 and reducing inflammation-promoting ones like NF-kappa B. And this helps maintain vascular health and neuronal integrity. So practically speaking, achieving these polyphenol-driven cognitive benefits typically requires around 400 to 800 milligrams of the chlorogenic acids per day, which is roughly found in about 2 cups of medium roast filtered coffee. Interestingly, a small amount of caffeine, around 75 milligrams to 100 milligrams, actually seems to improve your body's absorption of these polyphenols, creating a beneficial synergy. Higher caffeine doses might narrow blood vessels constriction, slightly counteracting some of the vascular benefits. So again, moderation remains key. And while caffeine clearly drives many of coffee's immediate cognitive enhancements and long-term neuroprotective effects, the rich blend of other bioactive compounds in coffee does deliver meaningful brain benefits even without caffeine. Decaf won't match caffeine's potential impact on adenosine signaling, but it does remain a valuable option if you prefer to avoid caffeine and you still want to have some brain supportive effects. Now let's talk about caffeine and physical performance, what the data says, how to use caffeine optimally, and when you're getting too much. So first off, caffeine is arguably the most studied and reliable performance enhancer available. It consistently improves performance across endurance sports, strength training, and cognitive tasks requiring focus and reaction speed. So how much caffeine do you actually need? The science points to a dose range of about 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of your body weight. Practically speaking, if you weigh about 70 kilograms or 155 pounds, that's roughly 200 to 400 milligrams of caffeine, or about 1 to 4 cups of coffee, depending on how strong your coffee is. Lower end doses, around 3 milligrams per kilogram body weight, are effective for most people, but higher doses, up to 6 milligrams per kilogram body weight, might be necessary if you're habituated to caffeine. In endurance events like running, cycling, swimming, you typically see about a 3 to 5% improvement in performance. In strength or power-based activities, caffeine reliably boosts strength output and muscular endurance by about 2 to 4%. And even, again, cognitive skills, focus, reaction time, attention, these get about 10 to 15% bump from a modest caffeine dose of about 100 to 150 milligrams. Caffeine peaks in your bloodstream around 45 to 60 minutes after ingestion, and the performance-enhancing effects do last about 2 to 4 hours. So keep this timing in mind to maximize its benefits, especially for competition or intense workouts, or if you're looking for that mental pump. There's a clear ceiling to caffeine's benefits. Going beyond 400 milligrams rarely provides additional performance gains and frequently increases negative effects like anxiety, jitters, increased heart rate, digestive issues, and crucially, sleep disruption. So consuming caffeine later than about 8 hours before your bedtime will cut into your sleep quality, undermining training adaptations and recovery. Unfortunately, decaf coffee does not have the same performance benefits. Studies consistently show decaf coffee is essentially equivalent to placebo for physical performance. Decaf coffee does provide beneficial polyphenols, and there's a variety of health benefits that we've already discussed. But if you're looking for this documented ergogenic physical performance enhancement, caffeine itself is necessary. If you are wanting to harness some of the ergogenic effects from your coffee, you might aim for a dose around 1.5 to 2 cups of coffee and consume it around 45 minutes to 60 minutes before your event or your training. If you use caffeine daily, periodically taking short breaks, anywhere between 2 to 7 days, can actually resensitize you to caffeine, making caffeine more effective when you return to it. And again, it's very wise for most people to stop consuming caffeine at least 8 to 10 hours before bedtime. You want to protect your sleep. You want your sleep quality to be good, and you want to be able to recover. For general health, longevity, and even cancer prevention, both caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee do offer substantial benefits. Regular consumption of either type of coffee is consistently associated with impressive reductions in chronic disease risk, including lower rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. And importantly, studies reassure us that neither caffeinated nor decaffeinated coffee increases cancer risk. Instead, these protective benefits largely stem from coffee's rich, complex blend of polyphenols, antioxidants, and other bioactive compounds, not just caffeine itself. But if you do drink decaf coffee, it's important to be aware of how the caffeine was removed. Most decaffeination processes use chemical solvents like methylene chloride or ethyl acetate. Methylene chloride, for example, can sound concerning. It's industrially used in paint strippers. But the levels permitted in coffee are extremely low and strictly regulated, generally far below any threshold considered harmful by the FDA. Ethyl acetate is sometimes called natural because it occurs in fruits, is similarly safe at these tiny residual concentrations. Independent testing consistently shows actual residues of these solvents in commercial decaf coffee are often undetectable or far lower than the FDA's already stringent standards, which is reassuring. But if you do prefer to avoid chemical solvents entirely, there are excellent alternatives. The Swiss water process, for instance, uses only water and activated carbon, no chemicals involved. Another popular solvent-free approach is the carbon dioxide decaffeination, which uses pressurized carbon dioxide gas to gently remove caffeine without affecting flavor or leaving residues. Both methods reliably eliminate caffeine while keeping beneficial polyphenols, antioxidants, vitamins, and coffee oils in them largely intact. Nutritionally, decaf coffee remains virtually identical to regular coffee, just minus the caffeine. And modern solvent-free methods also preserve the flavor remarkably well. So the science does show that decaf coffee, no matter how it's produced, even with solvents, is safe and has beneficial effects overall. If you look at most of these studies that have been done showing the beneficial effects of decaffeinated coffee, most people are just drinking standard decaffeinated coffee that is not using a solvent-free method. But if even trace amounts of chemical solvents do make you uncomfortable, choosing the Swiss water method or carbon dioxide decaffeination coffee is probably your best bet. There's a lot of discussion out there about whether coffee is contaminated by mold toxins called mycotoxins, and if these pose real health risks. Let's cut through the noise and look at what the science actually says, and then talk about practical steps to ensure your coffee remains safe. First, what exactly are mycotoxins? They're natural toxins produced by certain molds. In coffee, the primary mycotoxin of concern is called ochratoxin A, or OTA. At high chronic doses, far above what you'd ever encounter in coffee, OTA can damage kidneys and is considered a probable carcinogen. Occasionally, you might hear about aflatoxins too, but they're mostly never detected in coffee. Now, how common are these mycotoxins actually? Large-scale global surveys involving thousands of coffee samples show that more than 95% are well below international safety limits for OTA. Importantly, roasting your coffee beans destroys roughly 70 to 90% of any existing OTA, and brewing removes even more, leaving the final amount in your cup extremely low, far below any scientifically established health risk. In fact, epidemiological studies consistently show coffee drinkers have a reduced risk of liver and kidney diseases, exactly the opposite of what you'd expect if a low-level OTA mycotoxin exposure was a significant issue. So the reality is, for most coffee drinkers consuming moderate amounts, any mycotoxin exposure is minimal and far outweighed by coffee's proven health benefits. But if you're still concerned, and it's reasonable to want to minimize any potential risk, here are some of the best practices you can follow. 1. Choose specialty grade coffee beans from reputable roasters. Specialty coffee is carefully screened, tested, and graded, dramatically reducing mold risk. 2. Opt for washed, wet processed coffees. Washed coffees from regions like Ethiopia or Colombia have lower mold risk due to the removal of surface contaminants during processing. 3. Make sure you store your beans properly. Keep coffee beans in an airtight container away from moisture and heat to prevent mold growth. Ideally, consume them within about a month of roasting. And number 4, use paper filters when brewing. Paper filters can help capture residual compounds, including potential trace mycotoxins, which further reduces exposure. So in summary, yes, molds can occasionally grow on coffee beans, but good sourcing, storage, roasting, and brewing practices reliably eliminate any meaningful risk. I think the bottom line here is coffee's proven cardiovascular, metabolic, cognitive, and neuroprotective benefits far outweigh any theoretical mycotoxin concern, especially when you source and handle your beans with these simple precautions. Now let's talk about coffee additives. Many people ask, does adding dairy to your coffee blunt its beneficial effects? The short answer is partially yes, especially if your goal is rapid polyphenol absorption and maximum cognitive benefit. So here's what happens. Milk contains casein and whey proteins, which bind tightly to coffee's main antioxidants, the chlorogenic acids. These protein polyphenol complexes slow down early absorption in the small intestine, reducing the sharp immediate surge in these antioxidants in your bloodstream by about 20 to 30%. Instead, polyphenols travel farther down the digestive tract where the gut microbiomes eventually break them down. You're not losing the benefits completely, but you're massively delaying them and modifying how these compounds are metabolized. If you want to have immediate brain-enhancing effects, such as improved cognition, rapid antioxidant activity, and early anti-inflammatory signaling, black coffee or coffee with minimal protein is the way to go. Even small amounts of dairy can significantly blunt this rapid polyphenol availability. On the other hand, if your priority is general health, gut microbiome support, or simply taste and enjoyment, modest dairy consumption likely won't erase coffee's broader benefits. But if you want peak immediate cognitive enhancement from coffee's polyphenols, I strongly suggest you keep your coffee black or use a small amount of plant-based milk, such as almond milk, which interacts minimally with these beneficial compounds. Or what about MCT powder? Medium-chain triglycerides, or MCTs, behave differently from dairy proteins. Unlike casein and whey protein in milk, MCT powder does not bind polyphenols in coffee, so it won't significantly delay their absorption or blunt their rapid bioavailability. In fact, adding MCT to your coffee can potentially enhance cognitive benefits through a different pathway by increasing ketone levels, which provide an alternative, rapidly available energy source for neurons. This can support alertness, focus, and even mood, especially in a fasted or low-carb state. But there is another critical point to consider when you're using MCT powder, and that would be the saturated fat content. Heavy cream, MCT powders, These contain substantial amounts of saturated fat. And if you're consuming multiple cups of coffee daily, say 3 to 4 cups, you could be easily taking in an extra 15 to 20 grams of saturated fat per day in just your coffee. Consistent high saturated fat intake does elevate ApoB-containing lipoproteins, which is the primary driver of cardiovascular disease risk. So you don't want to be consistently elevating your ApoB with every cup of coffee that you're drinking. If you do drink coffee frequently throughout the day, it's probably wise to be mindful of what you add to your coffee. So occasional use of MCT or cream is likely harmless, but multiple times a day, and if you're doing heavy additions of it to your coffee, it might actually have a significant impact on your lipid profile. If you do want to keep your ApoB in check while maximizing coffee health benefits, you should probably stick with black coffee or small amounts of cream, small amounts of MCT, or also opt for the unsweetened plant-based milks like almond milk. Another common question I get is, can you add something to your coffee to amplify its cognitive benefits and reduce some of the jitteriness caffeine can cause? And the answer is yes. A particularly effective compound is L-theanine. This is an amino acid naturally found in green tea that readily crosses the blood-brain barrier. L-theanine works synergistically with caffeine. On its own, caffeine enhances alertness by blocking adenosine receptors, boosting dopamine and norepinephrine, great for focus, but sometimes this creates anxiety or jitteriness. L-theanine increases GABA and glycine signaling in the brain, creating a state of characterized alpha brain waves. These are the primary brain rhythms that are linked to calm, attentive states without sedation. So what you're doing by pairing the two is essentially smoothing out caffeine's stimulatory spike. Multiple studies show that combining roughly 100 to 200 milligrams of L-theanine with about 100 to 150 milligrams of caffeine, approximately the amount in a standard cup of coffee, significantly improves cognitive performance. People experience enhanced sustained attention, faster reaction times, better accuracy on demanding cognitive tasks, and notably fewer feelings of anxiety or jitters. L-theanine even dampens caffeine's transient blood pressure increase without sacrificing alertness. So practically speaking, here's what I think is best for maximizing the cognitive benefits of coffee. Pair about 1 cup of coffee, so 100 to about 150 milligrams of caffeine, with about 100 to 200 milligrams of L-theanine. Take them at the same time. They have similar absorption kinetics, so if you simultaneously take them, that works the best. You can easily find L-theanine as a powder or a capsule. It dissolves directly into coffee and has minimal taste effects. So this combination is really safe, it's well studied, and it's low risk at these doses. I do want to make it absolutely clear that L-theanine doesn't remove caffeine's sleep-disrupting effects. So you still need to keep caffeine intake early in the day. But if you're looking for that calm, sustained, jitter-free cognitive boost from coffee, adding L-theanine really is a powerful, scientifically validated tool. So in summary, coffee, when consumed correctly, is really a powerful tool backed by rigorous science for enhancing health span, extending lifespan, and protecting against the deadliest diseases of aging, including heart disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. We now know that coffee actively influences the fundamental mechanisms of biological aging at the cellular level, shaping everything from our epigenetic age and DNA integrity to metabolism, cardiovascular health, and cognitive function. But to summarize some of the benefits fully, timing and preparation do matter. Early in the day consumption maximizes circadian biology, optimizes sleep, metabolism, and overall health. Filtered coffee methods eliminate cholesterol-raising compounds while preserving antioxidants that actively repair DNA and reduce inflammation. And while caffeine offers unique neuroprotective and cognitive benefits, even decaf coffee contributes powerful bioactive compounds that nourish our gut microbiome and also fight disease. In practical terms, the science suggests consuming about 2 to 3 cups of coffee daily, ideally filtered and primarily in the morning hours. You want to keep additives minimal to preserve the immediate cognitive and long-term metabolic benefits. And you also want to consider strategic supplements like L-theanine to amplify caffeine's cognitive clarity without anxiety. Ultimately, coffee is an accessible, evidence-based approach to improving our health at every level, from cells and genes to cognition and physical performance. If used wisely, it's not just a beverage, it's really a scientifically supported intervention for longevity and well-being. I'm Dr. Rhonda Patrick, and I'll talk to you soon.